Imagine a sea not defined by coastlines but by invisible boundaries, a sea that seems suspended in time, floating in the middle of the Atlantic like an island of water and mystery. This is the Sargasso Sea, a place so vast it covers an area equal to half of the United States and yet it has no land boundaries. It's a sea of paradoxes shrouded in myths and fascinating realities. Centuries ago, Christopher Columbus sailed across these waters and documented his passage through the Sargasso in his journals. Although the sailors of his time were fearless, explorers who challenged sea monsters and legends, it is said that Columbus and his crew experienced an inexplicable unease in the Sargasso. Seeing vast brown seaweed covering the water's surface like a floating forest, they felt they had entered a different dimension. Columbus watched as these enormous masses of sargassum tangled around the hull, and, as night fell, silence enveloped the crew as the waters seemed to immobilize the ship in a ghostly calm. But the sailors didn't just fear the seaweed. According to legends, ships could be trapped by the sea itself, and there were tales of ghost ships wandering its waters, trapped in an eternal cycle, without direction or destination. They said that the ships, prisoners of the Sargasso, were a testament to the unbreakable strength of the ocean, and that in those waters the boundaries between the visible world and the unknown were very thin. However, the Sargasso is also a haven for life. If we could dive into its waters and look up from below, we would find a unique ecosystem, a kind of marine jungle. European and American eels undertake one of nature's most extraordinary journeys, traveling thousands of miles from Europe and America to reach the Sargasso Sea, their final destination. Adult eels, after years of living in rivers and lakes, set off for the open ocean and travel over 3,000 miles to reach these waters. Here, after a ritual that marks the end of their lives, they lay their eggs and die, and their larvae travel back, ensuring the continuity of a species that depends on the balance of the ocean and this natural incubator. In addition to eels, loggerhead turtles also seek these waters. After hatching on the beaches of the Atlantic, the small turtles swim to the Sargasso, where they find refuge in the floating algae. Here they spend their first years, feeding and protecting themselves until they grow large enough to return to their places of origin. Over the centuries, however, the Sargasso has changed. The natural trap formed by its circular current also traps more than just seaweed and marine creatures. Over time, the Sargasso has become a marine dump, accumulating garbage and waste that arrives from all over the Atlantic. Today, thousands of tons of plastic float here, bottles, fishing nets, and microplastic pieces that pollute the ecosystem and affect the species that depend on this refuge. The Sargasso has become a floating warning of the effects of pollution. The images of seabirds and fish trapped in abandoned nets are a grim reminder of the human impact on places that, although isolated, are not safe from our footprints. In addition, climate change threatens this delicate balance. The currents that define the Sargasso are experiencing changes due to global warming. If the currents are altered, the Sargassum could be dragged to other parts of the Atlantic, leaving behind an empty space, and without its floating flora, many migratory species would lose their sanctuary. This phenomenon would profoundly alter migratory patterns and affect entire ecosystems in the Atlantic, which depend on the creatures that come and go from this sea. The Sargasso Sea also holds a historical component that makes it even more enigmatic. For centuries, sailors, merchants, and pirates crossed the Atlantic without accurate compasses, facing an endless sea. But when they reached the Sargasso, the lack of wind and the concentration of seaweed made them feel trapped. Imagine the desperation of a crew stranded on a sailing ship, with no wind to propel them, surrounded by a vast forest of seaweed that prevented them from seeing beyond. For the ancients, this floating sea was a prison. The story of those trapped sailors fueled tales of ghost ships sailing eternally in the Sargasso, and thus a legend was born that has endured to this day. Even in modern times, the Sargasso Sea has been the scene of mysteries. During World War II, German submarines patrolled these waters, and there were reports of disappearances of several warships in the Sargasso, vanished without explanation. Rumors mixed with facts, and theories began to circulate about the currents and their possible effect on the electromagnetic field of compasses. Some claimed that compasses mysteriously malfunctioned, causing disorientation in ships and planes crossing the sea. Others claimed to have seen lights in the distance or perceived inexplicable sounds coming from the depths. For scientists, the Sargasso remains a place of great interest and mystery. Although much research has been done, there are still unanswered questions about how this floating ecosystem formed and how it is maintained. It is known that the circular current surrounding the Sargasso functions like a huge whirlpool, keeping the seaweed inside and creating an almost closed system. This whirlpool not only regulates the Sargassum, it also has an effect on the temperatures and salinity of nearby waters, affecting the weather patterns of vast regions in the Atlantic. The Sargasso is also a place where geology and biology meet in fascinating ways. Beneath its waters, the seabed holds minerals and rocks that, when detached, are carried by the currents and mix with the Sargassum. This constant movement of material creates a geological cycle that contributes to the richness of the ecosystem. It's like a floating laboratory of the Earth, where the forces of nature act in unpredictable and sometimes unknown ways. Here, scientists study the unique biodiversity and ecological processes found nowhere else on the planet. They conduct experiments to understand how ocean currents affect the distribution of nutrients and how these, in turn, influence marine life. They have discovered species of algae that exist only in this region, and that play a crucial role in the carbon cycle. They use underwater sensors to monitor changes in water temperature and salinity, vital data for predicting the impact of climate change. A fascinating finding was the discovery of a fish that glows in the dark, a unique adaptation for survival in the depths of the sea. This environment offers an invaluable opportunity to better understand the mysteries of the ocean and how we can protect it for future generations. It's incredible to think that, while we talk about space exploration, the discovery of planets and galaxies, on our own planet, there are places like the Sargasso Sea that still hold secrets. This coastless, floating, isolated, and life-filled sea is a reminder of how much remains to be discovered in our own oceans. Looking at the Sargasso, it's like seeing a time capsule from the past, and a warning for the future, a place where nature and history meet, and where each wave seems to tell a story that, although ancient, is still alive and moving.